Florida State and Miami kick it off this weekend. Joe, I got to admit, we have not been able to really talk a lot about the Florida State Seminoles. We've talked more about Miami over the last 5, 6, 7 weeks than we have about Florida State because of the level of opponents. We haven't talked about them much. I got to admit something, all right? And you brought it up in pre-production, and I fully agree with you. Watch out for this game now. Do not sleep on this rivalry game, because I do think that Miami players are going to come out, prove a point. I don't think it matters. I think Florida State is winning. Joe, Miami is a top 10 team when defending the run, and that's with the bad losses that they've had, Georgia Tech and others. If this Florida State team cannot run the football, which, by the way, their rushing offense, they're closer to around the 60 mark. Have not been great running the football. What's the status of Johnny Wilson? What's the status of Keon Coleman, which you know how I feel about Keon Coleman? I do feel that Florida State is going to prevail in this one. This is going to be, I think in the next 3 weeks, they got Miami and Florida in that mix. They're going to want to go in there and prove a point. That's why I'm picking them to win. Don't sleep on Mario Cristobal's Miami Hurricane team, because styles make fights. And if teams can stop the run on Florida State, we saw it against Boston College, we saw it against Clemson, things could get hairy pretty quickly for them. This game, I do think, is going to be early or tight early, within the half, maybe even bleeding into the third quarter. I do think Florida State is a fantastic fourth quarter team. They finish games really well. That's when they'll take over. Do not be surprised, to me, if this game is really close and people are like, I can't believe it. But it is a rivalry game too.
So to address what you're talking about here first, why this game could be close, and heck, there's even a possibility, Florida State fans, you can't overlook this Miami team. There is a possibility they could pull out this upset. A number of things come to mind when I talk about this. One, I have spoken so highly of this Miami defensive line. I am a big Leonard Taylor fan as a draft prospect in the interior. But Reuben Bain Jr. has been a wrecking ball, a freshman. He has been so freaking good. Nobody has been able to stop him. Florida State's offensive line has been a little bit up and down, so watch out for Bain to have a big game. I compare this to what happened last week between Notre Dame and Clemson. We remember a few weeks ago, or not a few weeks ago, at the beginning of the season when Florida State played Clemson close. And what happened was Clemson's defensive line completely removed Trey Benson in the rushing attack, forcing the passing game to be the primary focus for Florida State, which works fine for them, but they were stopped on a number of drives that put this game in a position for it to go to overtime and whatnot. I would be very wary that this Miami defensive line does something similar to what Clemson did when they played Florida State. Why I compare this to Clemson Notre Dame is that you very well could have Mario Cristobal rallying his team in a situation where they are backs up against the wall. They've played very poorly over the past few weeks. There is a lot of questions being thrown his way about his performance over the past few weeks. There is a lot going on right now. And look, we spent all last week crapping on Clemson, and look what they turned around and did. I think we just need to be wary. Wait, what? Hold on. You picked Notre Dame too pretty aggressively.
I said it was going to be a score game. I picked them by 7.
I don't remember that happening. My point is here, watch out for this game to end up being a close football game, because Miami is going to come out swinging and they need a rallying point, and this could be that for them.
So look, I went and watched their game last week versus Pitt today. Okay. Johnny Wilson, Keon Coleman being out, I think is a big deal. And I don't want to overreact to that, especially because I think Johnny Wilson, I was told if like multiple concussions on the year, he might not even go again in this game. Looks like Keon Coleman's going to be back. But Keon, their wide receiver room is really beat up, Joe. So if Keon Coleman is the only dude, which that's kind of really all they need, Okay, I'm not saying that it's not. If Miami, who has shown all year that they can keep this rushing attack under control, I don't know if you don't make Jordan Travis try to beat you through the air, because when I look at Miami, they have been good with their front seven. But the problem is, Joe, their back seven, their back five, whatever you want to call it, they give up some yards, man. Look what they gave up to King's team. Okay. And so that is why I think ultimately I just think Florida State is going to, if you don't watch the game and you look up at the end of the game and the box score says like 38-21 or 38-24, and you're like, oh, they just beat the shit out of Miami. I don't necessarily think so. I do think that they're going to keep this game relatively close throughout it all. The problem with me and Miami is this. Florida State, to me, all year, seeing them up close and personal, been tracking them all throughout the year, you cannot turn the football over if you're Miami to this team. And that is a massive problem with Miami.
That's a big ask for old Tyler Van Dyke over the past few weeks.
It is a very big ask. Like, I know what I would be asking.
It's a big ask from someone who has been very ass.
Yeah, I mean, he has not been good. You can't disagree that Tyler Van Dyke has been good at all. My thing would be, or what I was trying to say is, Florida State is like a shark in water. They are when they smell blood, they go for the kill. Okay, they've done that all year. When I look at games like Wake Forest early, yeah, whatever, but then all of a sudden, Joe, they come back, they smell blood in the water, they just destroy Wake Forest. Duke was the game for me going back and watching today. Remember how close that game was? And I know that Riley Leonard was out. Riley Leonard only had like 80-something passing yards in that game. Didn't run much. It was the running game for Duke that got things going early, and that game was close. Yeah. I kind of really think that this game could, if you're a Florida State fan, reminds me a little bit of Duke. Miami can run the football a little bit. Okay, they're 39th in the country in rushing offense. That offensive line has gotten progressively better as the year goes on. We saw how they performed earlier in the year against Texas A&M. I think it's going to be a recap of Duke, right? Like, that's what I envision it. But I do think this game could be, Florida State could really extend themselves. Van Dyke can't make mistakes. And here's another thing. You can't put him in situations, Joe, to make mistakes. Where am I going with that? You got to run some quick game. One hitch, let him throw. Because he does have some good tools. What I've seen from Miami is that they're wanting him to progress through the routes and read the coverage, and then he panics, and then he makes mistakes. If you want to win this game, get some play action, get some RPO, quick throws early. Because if you're able to do that, I think you can have some success in this running game. And with him, I don't think I would say he's playing as a below average quarterback, but if you get him on the move a little bit, make him have some short and good completions, try to get as many yak yards as you can early, maybe he can be okay. But God forbid, if he plays like he's been playing the last 5 weeks, they're in massive, massive trouble down there in Miami. And the question becomes, they're already asking, oh, well, this is year 2 under Mario. Oh, can he get it done? Can he get it done? And so those questions and the boo birds will be circling here.
So I talked a little bit about what's the path here for Miami, but I think that realistically how I think this game is actually going to play out, it's going to be more reminiscent. I don't think the Duke game really matches up with how this is going to play out. I think it's going to be more like the LSU Florida State game, not to open up too much of a wound. And what I mean by that is that in that game, we saw the game close early on, and then eventually turnovers happened in the second half, and that secondary started to really take over. I think with the poor performances by Tyler Van Dyke over this second half stretch of the season, as I have predicted, as I have highlighted and said that the guy is an overrated player and is underperformed when asked to step up to the occasion, has made some very terrible throws that has put his team in a position to fail. I think going up against the secondary that is very advantageous, is very good at turning the football over, can make some big plays against Tyler Van Dyke and take the football away. But the biggest thing that you touched on here, why I really believe is as long as you have at least Keon Coleman, no Johnny Wilson, the rest of this receiving core is good enough to take advantage of what is a very, very weak and inconsistent secondary. Their safeties are good, but their corners have been cooked by a number of different quality receivers. We saw what happened against UNC. You talked about the end of the game against Georgia Tech. They have shown signs of weakness consistently. Heck, even against Texas A&M, a game where they played their best football, they gave up some splash plays early in that game. It is on film, and if Keon Coleman is even 75% and able to play, tell me that guy's not sitting there in the film room licking his chops, getting excited about what he's about to get himself into. I think that Florida State, second half, after it being like a one-score game or maybe even tied up, they just explode out the gate and they end up winning by 2 scores.
Well, and this will be their last big game in Doak. Now, I know it's not their last one because they got North Alabama coming into Tuscaloosa. That game, actually, Joe's going to be on the CW. How about that?
Hell yeah.
But this is their last massive, meaningful game at home. And I think that this fan base, who has gone through a lot over the last decade, Joe, they're going to want to go out there and they're going to be loud. They're going to be raucous. Okay. This game being at home, I'm telling you, man, if you turn the ball over early, this team is a shark in water. You got to help out your quarterback. Now, Joe, I'm going to ask you a question before we move on. Okay. Would you pull Tyler Van Dyke? Let me pause. Let me rephrase that question. How short is the leash on Tyler Van Dyke?
You know what? God, I know I'm such a critic of him. Like, I know that I'm very critical of him, and I'm one of the few people that's actually been willing to be critical of him, and I was killed for it. This shouldn't be shocking, but the name of the freshman that played against Clemson didn't have like a bad football game. You know,
but you know what he did?
What?
Do you know what he did? He did not turn the ball over like Van Dyke has been doing.
That's the point. I would say with his current stretch and his performances, and I don't know the freshman's name because he played one football game and it's not going to come to my head immediately. But if he plays another bad football game, I think you do need to turn the page and eventually let the kid play. Let him get some experience so that you know what you have going into next year and you can get him ready. I don't think you take him out in this game, though. I think you got to go with the guy
Emory Williams.
Maybe.
Yeah, it's Emory Williams. He played against Clemson. Hey, he played against Clemson.
He played a good football game against Clemson. He played a pretty good football game. He didn't light it up.
Here's another thing, too. Miami was in their last 2 wins. Last 2 wins they got, Joe, overtime, 2 overtimes against Clemson, overtime against Virginia. And then last week, bro, they lost to NC State, okay? And when I look at this NC State game, and I watched it today, Van Dyke threw 3 picks, Joe. MJ Morris, like, he's not a good quarterback for NC State.
MJ Morris is actually a pretty good player. He's going to hop in the
for 21.
Well, he played like shit, but he's had some other good games.
I mean, he's not. I don't think he's that good. Okay, they didn't do anything well. Like, Miami did nothing well, and you can blame injuries. I mean, the Fletcher kid, I think, had over 100 yards rushing for them, but he had no touchdowns, and you had 3 picks from Van Dyke. I mean, how many games, Joe, do I have to see Van Dyke not play well? Like, how many times? He threw for 163 against Virginia. 163 against Virginia.
You know what's going to happen, Blake? Blake, you know what's going to happen? He's going to go out there and he's going to
go off
400 yards, 6 touchdowns, and it's going to be the greatest performance of his career because this is the whole thing just pisses me off about this is because the one time he plays well and everyone's like, oh, it's not the one time he's played well. He's had other good games. He's had big numbers in like garbage time before in the past. And he has that one good game against Texas A&M. And then we come on here and everyone's like, tell me to apologize. And I succumb to it. I'm tired of it. The guy's not good. I'm tired of getting cornered into this. He doesn't play good football.